everybody, welcome to my homestead and welcome to my channel. My name is Jared, and today we're talking to Rabbi Gurfein. And yes, he is actually real. I know that some of you thought that he was fake, but here he is. He is an Orthodox Jewish rabbi that lives in Israel, in Western Jerusalem. He is originally from the United States, from New York, but you're from Brooklyn. Was that right?
No.
Queens?
No. A little island called Manhattan.
From Manhattan itself. Okay. And he made Aliyah to Israel a long time ago. Initially went there not really a religious practicing Jew, but once he came to the land, it was destiny, it was fate, and he went to yeshiva and he became a rabbi, and he's extremely knowledgeable in all things Judaism. Now, I've brought him up from time to time on the channel. You may remember that he's the one that made the People's Talmud. It's that website that sometimes I reference, where essentially it kind of makes the Talmud more understandable to people that aren't so familiar with Judaism. And if you're trying to you've never been to yeshiva, so you don't really know these things. So it's for the layman to understand the Talmud. He did that. It was like a very long project, and so that's available, and I'll put the link for it in the description below. And then lastly, I got set up with him through Israel 365 News, because I got in contact with them. Go to my playlist called Special Guests, and you'll see the previous interviews that I did with Adam Eliyahu, which is he's a writer for Israel 365 News, and also Eli Michel, which is he's a content and brand manager, I think is his title. Anyway, they set me up with Rabbi Gurfein, and that's how this came to be. And so every other week I talk with him, just asking everything that I want to know about Judaism and things that I think would be relevant to the channel. But I was like, you know what? Okay, I've vetted him. He is the real deal. Just kidding. I trusted him from the beginning. But I was like, you know what? Maybe now's the time, if he's okay with it, I could record some, if not all of these conversations, because I really think that most of you will get a lot out of what he has to say. Again, acknowledging that it's two separate religions, but all of you know that we very much value the Jewish understanding of things, Jewish traditions, and that a lot of it is relevant to us as the church is being restored. It's not fully restored, and I tend to think that there's a lot of things that they understand that we maybe don't, and so that's why I like to just get into the nitty gritty and just see things from a Jewish point of view. So, for example, I thought that we would start with this, that this would be the most relevant way to start with him on the channel. Everyone's always interested in the tribes of Israel. I've done a video. In fact, I'm going to see if I can put it up on hold on. Let me see if I can put this up on the screen. Oh, wait, no, it's not. Never mind. I don't have to put it up on the screen. But I did a poll. Most of you are aware of this. I did a poll. We had 1,185 people respond. Which tribe you're from according to your patriarchal blessing. And it's no surprise, the vast majority are Ephraim, with 1,052 people that responded that they're from Ephraim. 66 from Manasseh, 12 from Judah, 11 from Benjamin, 6 from Levi, 4 Dan, 2 Reuben, 2 Gad, 2 Asher, 1 Simeon, 1 Naphtali, 1 Issachar, and 1 Zebulun. And so in the church, we have all sorts of doctrine and things that we learn primarily about Ephraim, Manasseh, Judah, Levi, and that's mostly what we focus on. But many of you in your patriarchal blessings are from these other tribes, and it's hard to find information about them without going to Jewish sources and really getting into it. So what I thought we would do, if it's okay with you, Rabbi Gurfein, is just kind of, if you could, I want to go through the tribes, just a brief overview, whatever you could tell us about their characteristics, their symbols, how they fit in to the larger picture, and stuff like that. And I was hoping that we could go in the order of, as we're looking at the camp of Israel when they camped around the tabernacle, maybe the order going from east, south, west, and then north. in whatever way, if you want to like start with Judah, Zebulun, or Issachar, but like kind of like in that order. Um, so from there, just take it away, however you'd like to kind of talk about these different tribes.
Sure, happily. Okay, so I guess the best way to go is in the order that you just suggested. We have a tradition where we break the 5 books of Moses down into approximately 51, 52 different, what we call Parsha readings, which are read every Shabbat, Shabbos, Saturday, Sabbath, whatever. And in
Sorry,
that,
really quick, really quick.
please.
When was that implemented? Would that have been like about the same time as the Talmud, or when did that happen?
No, it had to be before, because in the Talmud, there's a discussion. There was a school of thought pre-Talmud of actually doing it once every 3 years. So therefore, the delineation of doing it once a year versus once every 3 years had to precede the Talmud. Now, it could have been that what they did was instead, the divisions may have already been back in the days of Moses, but how much time you spent per section might have been what they were arguing over. So that instead of doing one section per week, you were doing one section per 3 weeks. Thus, it would go a longer 3-year cycle instead of a 1-year cycle. But the only reason I even referenced it is it's funny you would do that as a lead-off question, because the book of Bamidbar, which we translate to mean in the desert, which is the Mount Sinai, post Mount Sinai experience, the 40 years in the desert. I don't remember, unfortunately, how Bamidbar is normally called in other languages. Numbers.
Oh, Numbers. Okay, the book of Numbers, right?
I
Okay.
guess. I mean, is that number 4?
I think so. Yeah, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus,
Exodus.
Numbers.
Right, that's
Yeah.
right. The second book is the Rastafarian one. That's Exodus, Bob Marley. And then you have the number 4, which is the desert on a horse with no name. So in that period of time, what happened was, as you rightfully said, after the revelation of Mount Sinai, this was a huge transformation, because as you and I have shared, the Judaism and the Jews are not really a religion. We're a family that had very heavy duty religious experiences. I mean, impossible to ignore experiences. And it was only hundreds of years later, after the patriarchs of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, although there were the 12 tribes in the form of the 12 sons, they weren't really called tribes per se, or they really didn't become validated as tribes in a certain sense until now, coming out of Egypt, and now in the desert, and now at Mount Sinai. So
but during that time, they did know their lineage when they were in Egypt. They
oh yeah,
somehow
for sure,
kept track.
because the Levites, for example, were never enslaved.
Right. Well, yeah, we've talked about that. Yeah. Okay.
Right. So no, for sure they did. But to be officially a tribe meant that your lineage of a tribe member came through your father. Now, the membership in being a Jewish in the Jewish family prior to that also was through the father. Like if your father was Jewish, then you were Jewish. At Mount Sinai, that switched. And the only way a person could be born Jewish is if the mother was Jewish, regardless of what the father's status was. So it went from father regardless of the mother to mother regardless of the father. So, but the father aspect remained, because now there was the element of tribes. So therefore, if your father was Reuben and your mother was Issachar, you were Reuben. Now, in that idea, the nation, when it surrounded Mount Sinai, became the template for the nation now surrounding the tabernacle, or what we call the Mishkan, which means, I don't know what tabernacle actually means, but Mishkan is some place which means a dwelling, where God's presence would now dwell. So that became a kind of a microcosm of the Mount Sinai experience. And in that, exactly like you said, because there are 12 tribes, actually there are 13 tribes, but because there are 12 tribes, so they're broken into 4, and therefore 3 tribes per direction. And the 13th tribe is the Levites, who were the inner circle. Like if you can imagine concentric circles, you have the tabernacle, and then the next circle, the Levites, of which Moses and Aaron / Moses were one of the 4 sides. And then the outer circle were the tribes themselves. And then outside of them were the 1 million+ non-Jews who would come along to be part of that whole experience as well. So the first direction in Judaism that's always used, which is kind of interesting because when you look at maps, normally the key direction in a map is north. Maps are always built north. But in Judaism, if you were to have a Jewish map, I guess, it would always be pointing east, because east, the word in Hebrew for east, which is used in the Bible, is Mizrach. Mem, as a beginning of a word, is from, and Zorach means to shine. Like if you remember in the biblical story, Tamara, who almost died, and Yehuda relinquished at the last moment, saying, wow, she's more righteous than I am. And then she gave birth to twins. One of the boys was called Peretz, and the other one's called Zerach, which means to shine. So Mizrach means from the shining, means the rising of the sun.
Mhm.
And therefore, in the direction from where they were going, Jerusalem/Israel was going to be in their east. So everything was about heading towards Jerusalem. That's why it begins with the east. And then what would happen was you had the four camps, let's say in a circle, and now they had a march, so they would unfold. So therefore, again, like you said, it would go east, south, west, north, so that the north would wind up being in the end, and the east would be in the front, and then you would have south and west. East, south, west, and then north. Okay. Now the first
No,
of the,
sorry, a little pause because this is a good place to ask. And I don't mean to go too much on a tangent, but we've talked about before how, and I've talked about this on my channel, but how in Judaism, essentially the 12 tribes, not so much including Levi, but the 12, well, no, I guess also including Levi when there's a leap month, Adar too, but that the tribes basically are meant to correspond with the 12 months of the Hebrew year, and then when there's the leap year of Adar too, that would correspond with Levi, the tribe of Levi. Um, Now we talked about the four matriarchs, the four mothers of the tribes, and how there's four. And I think in the last time that you and me spoke, we were talking about how it's four because it's like they kind of represent the four times of the year, the four seasons. And in this case, I would assume that they would also correspond with the four directions.
correct, right,
And
right. Time and space, so we're always interrelated.
and then I don't think I've asked you this before. I'm pretty sure I haven't. Leah had 6, and then the other ones gave birth to 2. Is there something to that? Is there any deeper understanding to why Leah 6 and the other ones 2? Because those are even numbers, and does that in any way correspond to the directions and or the months of the year?
Right. Well, clearly, obviously, if it's 6, so you're not going to have you're going to have 2 directions, which could be all of her children, right? Because you're going to have 3 and 3.
Okay. So basically just that, and then like with would that correspond to the time of the year? Like would
Well, let's do this a little bit differently. There's
okay,
another way to look at time, and that's day and night,
okay,
right? So in the Bible, we see that Jacob thought he was marrying Rachel,
hmm
right? His father-in-law tricked him. We pronounce his name Lavan. I don't know, not sure how the name is pronounced. Laban, maybe.
it just Laban. I think we just call it
All right, well,
Laban.
Laban's gotta be careful because Laban over here in Israel means yogurt, but but Lavan means white. It's, I guess, most of the yogurt is white, so maybe that's where it's from. But that was his father-in-law. There's an expression that behind every great man is a shocked mother-in-law.
Mhm.
So that was also like that was the father-in-law. Okay, so it becomes a package deal. So he slipped in Leah. And the Bible says that when Jacob realized it, again, loose translation to English, it says, and in the morning, behold, it was Leah. Right?
Okay.
Now, what does that really mean? I mean, the Bible is, I mean, it may have a feeling of theatrics, but it's not about theatrics. It's way, way deeper than that, even though it can span all levels of human comprehension. So what's it really saying when it says, and behold, it was Leah? Again, it wasn't just like voila. What it really means is that you would have thought, or he would have thought, that the entire, what we call tikkun olam, the entire rectification of mankind, of the world, was supposed to have happened through Rachel. and he suddenly realized he was wrong. It was going to happen through Leah. So therefore, Leah is in a way, the hidden one. I mean, they're both hidden in certain ways, but Leah is always the extremely modest one. And in that modesty, that represents let's call it the half of the 24-hour clock, which is related to the night, because the nighttime is something which is hidden. So therefore, Leah, in a sense, is a entire entity. It's a single block. The day, however, is broken into parts. And those parts of the day are 3 parts. I mean, loosely in English, it would be like morning, noon, and evening, or late afternoon. So those are why you have the other children, which are sets of 2, because they're going to be more the active time of the day. Always represents activity in this world. And when the day is out, you forget about the fact that there are planets in the universe and how small you are. And we become very filled with our egos. And I've got to get to my business, and I got a deal I have to close today, and got to drive my kids to the baseball game, whatever. You're busy, busy, busy. That's the daytime. So therefore, it has to be broken into little chunks so that a person can sanctify or utilize those times more carefully. Whereas the night, person tends to sleep as one unit. So that sleeping, on the one hand, is a sense of lack of awareness. And behold, it was Leah, because we were lacking awareness. And on the other hand, it's also that humility of suddenly realizing how small speck Earth is in the grandeur of God's creation of the world. So that's more the relationship than the seasons per se. The seasons per se doesn't get into the how many children, because children are derivatives. It gets more into the 4 per se, and therefore the 4 primary seasons.
Do the characteristics of the seasons correspond to the 4?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we've spoken this. I mean, 4 goes all the way back to the 4 letters of God's holiest name.
Yeah.
So these are this whole idea. I mean, if you look at this world, what is this world? This world is, according to physics, this is a world of time and space. It's 3 dimensions, and then the 4th dimension being time, if you will. And then these 4 dimensions of space and time, which is 3 and 1, are really a cube. So therefore, the creation of this world as a cube is something which is the primary shape that we live in. So that's why by the time this world's being created, it's operating on 4 letters, because of 4 legs of a table.
That makes a lot of sense. And I've talked about that on the channel before, the whole thing with God's name and not using the same letters, because we completely respect Judaism, even if we don't have any Jews around. So I used like the letters A, B, C, D, just to kind of like demonstrate in a spreadsheet, just like how it works, and how there's 2 of the same letter. So when that's the case, and we're talking about God's name, everybody, okay, you know what I'm talking about. So that makes it so that when you have the different configurations of those 4 letters, 2 of them being the same, you end up with 12 different configurations that you can
Right.
have.
Maybe you should, if you'll forgive me, maybe instead of ABCD, you would do ABCBD.
Yeah, well, that's why I did. You'd have to see the thing that I put together. I kind of started like with ABCD, but then showed how when you go ABCC or ABDD, then you have only 12. Okay,
Right,
so
right.
okay,
Exactly. So those permutations of those combinations, because you have 3 digits of 4 letters, is like you said, 3 times 4, that's 12. And that's where you have the 12 months. That's where you have the 12 tribes, because the 12 tribes were created to be in the inner circle, in juxtaposition to the outer circle, which would be the zodiac frame of the 12 houses, or the 12 months of the year. And each one of them brings down a different permeation. I think we spoke about this. Maybe it's worthwhile interjecting again, if you'll forgive me.
yeah,
But
anything is fine. Yeah,
it's because people say, well, look, I just came back, as I said before we went live, that I just came back from the Emirates. And when I was in Abu Dhabi, they brought me into this mosque to see. And the mosque was unbelievable, gorgeous, beautiful. And on one of the walls, they had the 99 names of God. which is really 100 names. And the interesting thing was that the 100th name, they were like these little circles on the wall. The 100th name was blank because you can't comprehend it, which I thought was a very interesting idea. But, and I'm not
Is
an
there a
expert.
parallel between that and Judaism? Like in Islam, is there 100 names? Is that the same in
I don't know.
Judaism?
I don't know if anybody ever counted them in Judaism. I mean,
Okay.
it,
But
it could
in Islam, they have that concept of 100
correct.
names, then you leave the 100th blank because it's like unknowable and beyond, and yeah,
Exactly. Right. Well,
transcendent.
right. I didn't want to go down that path. I was just mentioning because I wanted to share the idea of what does it mean to have multiple names of God. It doesn't mean that there are multiple gods, God forbid. But rather, forgive me being redundant from our earlier times together, but you're walking down the street and you hear from behind you, somebody says, "Hey, you," or somebody yells out, "Dad," or somebody yells out, "Sweetheart," or somebody says, "Mr. So and so." So all of these names that you're being called, hopefully nice ones, but all of these names you're being
Hopefully.
called, you know what it's doing is they're talking about you. And you also know, based on what you hear, that's going to be your face the way you turn around. If you hear "sweetheart," that's your wife. So you're going to have one face, as opposed to if you hear "Mr. So and so," you'll have more former face. Or if it's like, "Dad," so it's only you. It's all you. But according to the way the name is called, will be the reaction you get. So in the algorithm that God built, one of the zillions of algorithms that operate this world, therefore, the multiple names of God does not mean different gods, but it means that by knowing what name of God to call will be an aspect from the way God will react to your calling.
Mhm.
So that same idea, the 12 months, I'll have to give you an analogy, but I think this is only going to work for the people on your program who are maybe 50 and older.
I got a fair amount of those,
Oh,
according
good,
to
good.
my Google
There you go.
Analytics, my
Exactly.
YouTube Analytics.
Exactly. It's like, us dinosaurs, most of our references are getting washed out yearly. But if you remember in the Wayback Machine, when you used to go to movie theaters and you wanted to get a Coca-Cola before cans, there was a machine and you dropped a coin in and the cup would fall down and then the ice would come in and then the syrup would come in. Remember that? Or are you too young for
I'm
those?
too young. That was like like when you went to the movies.
Yeah, there was no such thing as cans. A cup would drop down and be held, and then according you put grape or Coca-Cola and the syrup, and then but sometimes, most of the times, the cup wouldn't fall. You just have to put your hand in there, and whatever you got, because the machine didn't always work.
Yeah.
But that's sort of what it is. Like God drops the cup down. That's we call it in Hebrew Beit Kibul. It's the receptacle. The world here is the receptacle of God's blessings, but then there are different aspects of how that combination comes into that cup. So as it rotates each month, it's going to be a variation so that it goes around the full cycle, and together in its wholeness, it becomes a complete aspect, which is why this might not mean much to your viewers if they're not really familiar with Hebrew, which why should they be?
I
But
think some of them are, but not all.
okay, so the word in Hebrew, for example, for month, since we're talking about month, is the same letters as the word for new. And that's N-E-W, meaning to suggest that there are two contradictory frameworks of time moving in the Jewish calendar, because in the Jewish calendar, we have 4 New Years. It's
Mhm.
not just like December 31st. There's 4 different New Years. And again, these are relating to those 4 primary letters. And the two major one of those 4 are 180 degrees opposite on the circle, complete opposite ends of each other. And they actually, as somebody once said, do not refer to it as the Garden of Paradise that God created, rather refer to it the Garden of Paradox, because the biblical word for heaven, I know heaven in English comes from haven, like a safe haven,
Mhm.
but the word in Hebrew in the Bible for heaven is shemayim, and shemayim is a combination of 2 contradictory words, water and fire, right? Normally one causes the other to evaporate, or the other one, puts out the other. I mean, they don't work together. You use water to put out fire, right? So God, however, can obviously take things which do not work together and make them peace. That's heaven is peace. So to take fire and water and have those names as the essence or the ingredients of what heaven's all about is the irony of paradox. And that paradox, instead of paradox being conflicting, which often leads to war and fights and things like this, and oh, my God's better than yours, my religion is better than yours. That's like pea brain thinking. That does not entertain God, but rather it's, wow, look at the magnificent diversity that God created. And when we learn and respect and appreciate what each of us and all of us bring to the table, nobody's left off the table, then we actually create mankind, which unfortunately my grandfather, blessed memory, renamed as man unkind until we become mankind. So that idea, therefore, is on one side of time, you have month, which is newness, where everything is perpetually new. The other side of the month, which is maybe more the classically known in the outside world Jewish New Year, called Rosh Hashanah. Rosh means the head of the Shana, but Shana in Hebrew means to be repetitive, cycles. So you have the Rosh Hashanah is the creation of a world of cycles, food cycles, evolution, or whatever it should be. It's all cyclic, if you want, planet rotations, all cyclic. And therefore, it's all repetitive. It goes around and around and around. Whereas on the other side, if you're dealing in the power of newness, well, this is the source of innovation. This is the source of creativity. This is the source of being able to come up and see things, like Martin Luther King once said, it was like, I see something, I say, why not? So, right, that ability to see something that other people don't see, that's a higher power of how to relate to time. And when you capture the power of newness, then you understand that every single second in time is never redundant. There's no repetition. And therefore, everything is unique, which the first thing that does, if you really understand that idea, is you remove boredom from your life. You can never be bored. It's like walking around with a perpetual bottle of seltzer water tickling your nose all the time. You just, that's it. It's like, wow, 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 wow. That's the newness of life. Now, that word, which means new, which also means month, is very interesting because this four-letter name of God that we've been referring to has the numerical value of 26. And 26 times 12, which is the 12 months, equals the numerical value of this word chodesh, which means month. So therefore, the representation of the 26-letter name of God in all of its variations through the 12 attributes of the months creates this amazing access to mankind to connect to the newness, where nothing is boring, nothing is old, everything is perpetually new. Now you can go deeper and you open up the facets of each one of them, right? It's one thing to have an
really quick before we go deeper,
I'm sorry.
just in case anybody doesn't know, I've explained it a few times on the channel, but there's always new people and sometimes you miss videos. These 4 New Years, you'll recall we talk about Rosh Hashanah a lot because it probably corresponds maybe the best to what we typically think of as a new year, because that's when the date changes on the Hebrew calendar. But you have, like you was saying, I know that there's the other 3. There's like a new year for animals and trees, and then is like the first of Nisan. Is that's the other one?
Nailed it.
Yeah. So because okay, so you guys think of it like this. Rosh Hashanah is in the 7th month, Tishri. Okay, 7th month. Nisan, even though it's the first month, it's not the one where the date changes from year to year, but it is considered a new year. So you have those two. They're like basically on pretty much opposite sides of the year for the most part. And then the other 2, one for animals, one for trees. And so that in case you didn't exactly know, those are the 4, and that's essentially what he's referring to. So like he said, if I'm understanding right, with like the first of Nisan, that would be newness, new things, whereas Rosh Hashanah would be cycles. Yeah. So okay. So that just to like to stop for a minute and just to recap.
Oh no, yeah, please, thank you. I like it. You can see it in an interesting sort of way as well, because the word Tishrei. Okay, now I'm going to test your Ulpan Hebrew here. Right? What the first letter of Tishrei is? What letter?
Remember, right? Is it Tav?
Yeah, which is which? Of the 22 letters, what number would that
Oh
be?
gosh, I'm not that far yet.
Oh,
I
okay.
know like the first four. I could like quickly like maybe do the first four. Beyond that,
That's all right. That's how I am. And when it comes to numbers in foreign languages, I get up to about 4 or 5, and then so it's
yeah.
the last letter. Tough is the last letter.
Oh, it's
Now,
the
if you
last
work,
letter. Okay.
yes, and that's why it's tough, right? So it's the last letter. And if you work backwards, if you take the Hebrew alphabet, which are God's tools that he, so to speak, uses, not just sound, but these little elements. Maybe that's a better word to call them than letters. Elements, the elements of creation are the letters, which is funny because when you walk into physics, you see the element chart, and suddenly the C no longer stands for cat, but now it's carbon, right?
Mhm.
So these letters are the elements that God uses to create the world. But if you go to the very last one, which is tough, watch this. It's tough, shin, resh. So that would be pronounced tishrei, tishrei. In other
Okay.
words, the classic, what you're calling the classic New Year, is actually the Hebrew alphabet working backwards, and it ends with its fourth letter is the Hebrew letter Yud, which is the only letter in the alphabet that does not touch the baseline. It stays in the air. It always is pure. It's always ideal. It's never, I don't want to use the word polluted, but let's say grounded by the physical world. It always remains in a spiritual state, suggesting that like Artza, I guess, the famous finding God in nature, that therefore the natural world is created on Rosh Hashanah, the world of nature, the world we're living in right now. That's human form, talking to you, whatever. So it's the furthest from God is the nature or the natural world. And therefore, nonetheless, if one were to peel away those letters, one will come to the Yud. In other words, one will still find God. Whereas on the other side, the Nisan, the first of the month of Nisan, New Year, which is the newness, there, first of all, that word it has nothing to do with Japanese auto industry, but what it has to do with is the nes, which means miracle. So you have on one side of creation the natural order, and then the other side of creation is the miraculous, the world of miracle. Now, this, if I may digress, I think it's really important wisdom that hopefully will be appreciated.
Of course.
These two opposites are one of the key concepts of the Star of David, because you have two, with the Greek letter delta, two triangles in different directions. By the way, that's why in Judaism we would never use a single delta, because a single delta, like an arrow, is a symbol of idolatry, because it suggests an isolated force other than God, which is idolatry. But a double delta, or if borrowing from the Asian yin yang, is the idea that every time there's a force, there's an equal counter force. So they have this force is countered by that force. Now, this force from here going down, this higher level is the world of miracles or spirituality. The lower one going up is the physical world or the world of nature. Now, what is each one trying to do? Well, the spiritual world is looking for vessels in order to be able to manifest that light into the lowest levels, that nothing should be void of God's light. There's no such thing as being outside God's reach. There's no such thing as being so evil that you fall off the grid. Doesn't happen, because wherever you go, there's God. Even in hell, there's God, right? God's everywhere. So your access point to God, thank God, is everywhere. That's the amazing ability of a single thought a person can save and rectify their entire life. How can you do that if you're so far from God? Because there's no such thing as being far from God, because that suggests that God's over there,
Yeah.
right? So therefore, that level of the spiritual is looking to come down at the physical. That's the new year of what Nisan miracles are all about. Miracles. The other one, however, is the elevation of the physical. In other words, cutting down trees and building tables and chairs. That's taking raw, implying wisdom, and elevating it to a higher form. A table and a chair is regarded as a higher form than just a tree, not to make light of trees, of course, but in the aspect of elevation. So therefore, the lower world is always trying to elevate. But here's the key. Here's the key to how, because ultimately it's all about unity and oneness. So how do those two paradoxes become heavenly? How does the fire and the earth come together so they're not at each other's wits, but rather creating the oneness, which is what it's all about? The answer is to be able to see the natural order of miracles. In other words, that there's nothing miraculous about a miracle. A miracle has its own set of science.
Mhm.
It appears like if you were to take some sort of a virus. Well, I shouldn't use this now because there are a lot of anti-vax people. But in the olden days, when people got penicillin shots and people really appreciated science, so if you took those into certain countries in South America, they can't. How can they understand? You stick something in their arm and it doesn't. They don't have the science. They can't make the equation. So too, the reason that we're blown away by miracles, which we should be, but the reason we're blown away by them is because we don't understand the science behind them. There's math behind miracle. So therefore, there's nothing miraculous about miracle. And when you realize that lowers the bar of miracles to when conversely, at the same time, you raise the lower bar, which is there's nothing natural about nature.
Yeah, yeah.
And yeah, when you realize that nature is the wildest miracle, the only problem is we get used to it. So we don't realize how miraculous it is. You can open your eyes and see. You can open your mouth and talk, and not just talk, but the other person can actually understand what you're saying. It's all miracle. But because we get into the thing, we get in there, we just, oh well, that's the way it is. It's natural. But that's what we have to. Our challenge is to break that veneer, because if we break that veneer, then suddenly we free the natural world and we see God in everything. Wow, 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 wow. That's the newness element, and vice
I'm
versa.
impressed by talking about this, the newness element, talking about names of God and stuff like that. It seems abundantly clear I think this is something that we both hold in common very much, is that um that how do I say it? Like precision is important. Using words specifically is important. They're not just like arbitrary things. And we can talk about Kabbalah because that goes like a lot more into it.
I have to interrupt you. I'm so
Okay.
sorry, but we're about to jump off. I realize we have 1 minute. If we do, we'll just hit the link and come back in.
Yeah. Yep. I'll do that right
Okay.
now.
So,
I'll see you
okay.
in just a second.
Okay.
Okay. Sorry, we had to do a little break. I've done this before on my other interviews because Zoom only gives you so much time. I think it's 40 minutes and then you have to start a new thing. So in case anyone was wondering, that's what's going on. I used to pay for it, but I don't anymore because I've kind of cut back on the interviews. And so anyway,
Same thing. I also gave it up.
yeah. So words important, precision important, and in everything that he's been talking about. And we may have to talk about the tribes maybe in a future interview, but I think it's really important. The reason why we're still talking about this is because you have to kind of with when we're thinking about the concepts of 12 and tribes and what they mean and all this stuff. This is basically kind of like the foundation, I think, is talking first about the fourness, talking about the four wives, because that's really, it's where this family starts, so to speak, when we're just when we're talking about numbers. So just as a recap, we've talked about the four directions, we've talked about the four seasons, and we're also talking about the four new years on the Hebrew calendar in Judaism. So these things are significant. Squares, four, names, all these things are not arbitrary. In Judaism, as I've said many times before, words mean a lot and letters mean a lot. Letters equate to numbers. They're basically the same. It's one vessel that has a double value. And so that would be something to maybe think about in our own church, as we place importance in emphasis on names and numbers as well. That's why I like to learn um from Rabbi Gurfein and others. So um did you have more that you wanted to say about the New Year's? Because it didn't seem
Oh,
like
you know me, we could go like for months without breathing.
you're so full of knowledge. But as time goes on, like right now, I am but the learner, but soon I will be the rabbi by the end of this.
Go for it. The Talmud says that there are two relationships where the giver's success is defeat. And one is a parent with his child. The parent wants the child to be better than him or her. And the other is a teacher. Teacher wants to, I just got an email today from somebody who was thanking me so much because he was a student of mine this year. And I wrote back, I said, are you kidding? I want to be the guy that when you become the super scholar, I can say I'm the one that taught you how to make the layup. So that's what it is as a teacher. I mean, and Rabbi Akiva always said that more than the calf wants to nurse, the cow wants to milk. So that's the beauty of them. In fact, the Rabbi Akiva's teacher, his teacher, Rabbi Eliezer, was a very famous story in the Talmud. I guess maybe not that famous in the whole world, but in those of us that live in the world of Talmud, it's a famous story. And he said he was very frustrated. He said to his student, Rabbi Akiva, he said, I have so much to teach, and I just don't have disciples who are ready for it. And he gave an example. He knew 300 different incantations to magically create cucumber fields alone. That was one example, just an example. And then he said, but no, nonetheless, compared to my teacher, I'm a little puppy lapping at the side of a lake. So when you're dealing with infinite wisdom, because it's godly wisdom, I have this new expression now. I said, forget AI. There's GI. There's godly intelligence. Why do you want to get bogged down with artificial intelligence? That's not going to have love, right? But godly intelligence is going to beat AI solid and have love and have all of what God has to offer, which is infinite. So that's why in our teachings, they ask, where's the end of the universe? I think I once shared this with you, that the end of the universe is the tip of your longest finger, meaning however far you can reach, that's where your universe ends. Because the universe has no end, but God has no end. So if you become smarter, your universe just got bigger. So,
Is there a time, sorry, and I guess I digress on this one, but you made me think of a question. In Judaism, is there a time in the future when there will be more knowledge? Because there's so much knowledge, and we God has given us the ability to live forever. Is there going to be a time, for example, like during the Messianic age, or maybe beyond that time, where there's just going to be so much learning and more understanding? I know in Judaism it's just absolutely, it's impossible. You'll never reach God. But will there be a time when there's an outpouring of like a lot more knowledge, do you think, or do you know?
Well, the prophets all talk about this. How do you say it in English? Sorry, Ishayahu, Isaiah.
Mhm.
In Isaiah, there's a whole talk about in the third temple that there will be a flood, or there'll be maybe even before the third temple there'll be a flood, but it'll be a flood of wisdom, not of tsunami, God forbid. And there will be a whole period in time where people will really, I hate this word, woke, but there'll be a holy woke as opposed to another kind of woke, which is really going to sleep in the pretext of woke. Sometimes people see holiness as evil and darkness because they haven't prepared their own vessels, so they can't absorb that light. And I don't now. My turn to digress for a moment. And there's a famous verse in the Bible when Pharaoh, we call him, Pharaoh is been decimated. Egypt has been decimated with the 10 plagues. And now it's the 10th and the worst, which is the death of the firstborn, which correlated with the same night of the Jews being let free from Egypt. And he himself was a firstborn, so he thought he was going to die. And his son died, which was a firstborn. And so he wakes up in the middle of the night, and the normal, and you have to translate this way because otherwise to the English ear it won't make sense. But the normal translation is And Pharaoh woke up in the night and he cried out for Moses and Aaron because he never went to them. He didn't know, they lived in Brooklyn. He had no idea how to find them. So he's out running around. But that's the translation, but it's wrong. I mean, it's correct. That's the meaning. That's not the translation. If you read it in the original, the holy language, you would see a phenomenal thing. I'm going to do a verbatim translation. And Pharaoh called Moses and Aaron night. They had brought so much light into the world that he could only see it as darkness because he didn't have the vessels. He hadn't been prepared.
The idea that, well, just what you just said. I guess like in Christianity, like the saying goes that the darkness does not comprehend the light, essentially. Yeah.
Yeah. And so what'll
like
happen then? I'm sorry. Yes. What'll happen then is when there will be this amazing explosion almost of light in the world, it will create a tremendous amount of hatred. And you see that a lot. You see the way everything is so hypocritical between the way Israel is treated in the United Nations, other than, you got the most incredible atrocity. Front page of today's paper, but I could have taken any paper in the last 25 years. Today's paper, the Israeli government permitted, now hold on to your chair because I know this is going to make you very upset because it's really horrific. A group of those lousy Jews went into a part of the Holy Land and they built a place to study God's wisdom. And the US State Department came out extremely outraged, right? In a country, forgive me, in your country, where you have how many homeless people that would do anything for a home, but all the way over there on a completely abandoned rock where there was nothing, no one was replaced. And these are God's children who've come home in the God's wisdom and so on. But the Pharaoh, who happens to sit in the White House right now, suddenly felt that this was going to bring nothing but darkness into the world. Because the rest of the world, of course, is so illuminated and so peaceful. So you have a situation now where as the world will show more light, it will be seen as darkness. And you find this in a very interesting place at Mount Sinai. If you read carefully the verses of the Mount Sinai experience, you'll suddenly see this really out of place verse that says the top of the mountain was a pitch black dark cloud. Oh, what's that? You have this unbelievable light and God coming down with hundreds and hundreds of thousands of angels. And everybody's like, as if God had like unzipped the heavens and everybody's seeing this. Jews and non-Jews, or as I like to say, Gentiles and non-Gentiles, everybody's standing there watching this. And suddenly there's how can there be darkness? And this idea, because in order to really be able to see the light, God wants to test and will put the darkness there specifically to see who can pierce the darkness and really see what's light and what's dark. Pharaoh couldn't do that. That's why he called Moses and Aaron, he called them night because he wasn't able to perceive that. So just by the fact that there'll be great wisdom doesn't necessarily mean that there'll be great peace in the world. That's all I'm trying to get to.
Yeah, it'll be essentially a pretty like painful experience for those that are living in darkness, in kind of like a world of their own making, fantasy, not living in reality, things like that. Yeah, basically truth can be a very hard thing to experience if you're living against the truth, because you can't change truth, you can't change reality. That's within the realm of God, and so that's what's so hard about it, is it's permanent. You can't do anything about it, and so you realize an unflattering aspect of yourself going against truth in God's ways. So okay, so again, so we've covered 4 in many other things. Just as a recap one more time, the 4 directions, the 4 seasons, the 4 Jewish New Years on the Hebrew calendar. Since we're talking about 4 in the 4 wives, is there any other, does this show up in any other place, or it does?
Sure, right behind you.
What's that?
Right behind you, you got that forever.
Oh, forever. Okay. Now that's English, but
I, I know I'm sitting here looking at forever the whole time. And I find it's also funny because we refer to the patriarchs as the forefathers, but there are only three of them.
it's funny. Okay, so
Oh, sure it does. The answer is, of course it does. It's the 4 cups of wine on Passover. It's
yeah.
the 4 species that are bundled together on Sukkah. They're the 4 walls of the Sukkah. And every time you have four, the beauty of this is as you understand these things, they all line up. They create Jacob's ladder of wisdom. And then each one becomes another, another, and another. And suddenly you see how all these, wherever you find that four, and it's true of any number. And then you plug it up, like you ramp it up, turbo drive it, which means you connect it to that yud, which we spoke about before, which is above. So it becomes 40. Now you move into 40. Wow. Well,
Mhm.
40 is the middle letter of the Hebrew alphabet. So therefore, it's the place of balance. And 40 are the, right? And the rain are the, you have to tell you something. When you move to Israel, you don't become bilingual, you become semi-lingual. You never completely get the Hebrew, you kind of lose your English, so you're like in nowhere's land. But the flood, that's it. So you have the 40 days and 40 nights of the rain. You have the first 40 days of the baby in the mother's embryo, which in Jewish law is a very important moment, because if there are circumstances for an abortion, so it would be better if it's before 40 days, because then it's not really human. It's only called the sandal at that point. But at 40 days, that's when the soul enters into the body. And that's why the Hebrew word for the baby in Hebrew is called a vlad, which has the numerical value of 40. So there are many, many things. But again, that once you understand 4, then you can understand how 40 becomes and endlessly. And then when you really crank it 10 times 10 or 100, now you have 400. And that's the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet. That letter Tuf
Oh,
is
it is?
400.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So maybe with like the little bit of time that we have left, just to kind of kick things off a little bit, because maybe we'll save the rest of it for like the next time, 2 weeks from now. Um okay. So before talking about the camp of Israel, talking about the 12 tribes, this is kind of an important concept to nail down. Um, because why, again, why did they camp in the four main different groups? Why is that divided into 3 tribes per group? It's important to nail down.
Sure. 4 plus
So
3 is 7, 7 days of the week.
yeah. So did I exit out of it? Give me just 1 second here. So maybe if unless you think it'd be done better in a different way, would you want to start with Judah or
Oh yeah, for
Zebulun?
sure. I was thinking the same. It's always better to leave with a cliffhanger. That way you get your audience to come back.
Perfect. Okay, let's do that.
So actually, I wouldn't start. Oh well, yeah, we would start with Judah. But so now the question is, who are the first three? Right, the first three of the east, heading towards the light, heading towards the Mizrach, from where it shines. So Judah is King David. I mean, that's Judah, right? He is the
Mhm.
king, and so therefore, as the king, they always say in the Israeli army, the officers are on the front line because they're leading the charge. They're not yelling out charge. They're up there leading the charge.
Yeah.
So therefore, Judah is the leader. He's that which is the lion. Now it's interesting though, by the way, which number child is Judah?
I'd have to say, is he 4? I can't
You got
remember.
it. That's
It
right.
was
Back to
4?
he sure
Yes.
is.
I wasn't even thinking about us talking about 4. I was literally thinking, okay, I think it's da da da. All right, so cool. Okay, 4.
Yeah, yeah. And that's why his line, let's say for the moment, is the fourth, the patriarchs. So you have the first three, which are the higher, which is Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Actually, it would be Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the middle. But the fourth, which is all the way down on the feet, which is called kingdom, is the hidden one, right? Because what happened when the prophet Samuel, came to, God said, go over here to Ishai's, forget it, I'm just going to use the Hebrew names. You'll put
We'll
in
figure it out.
subtitles later. Yeah, exactly. So God sends him to Ishai and says, "There's the king who's going to replace Saul." So he comes and he sees all these wonderful young men, and it's none of them. And then there's the one guy that they don't really even think is a brother, so that that's King David, like the hidden one. So
Mhm.
everything about him is hidden, and he has all the controversy on the external level of his life with Bathsheba and all these, and the wars and all these, cloak and daggers with Achitophel and Doeg, the head of the court, and even running for his life from King Saul. And yeah, I mean, he was not living in Boca Raton, let's put it like that. He was living in a tough, tough, tough life. And yet that birthed ultimately the house of the Messiah. Why? Because if you could live in hell and you could see God in every moment of hell, then you've blown the facade. It's like you've suddenly realized that the Wizard of Oz is this professor from Kansas, from behind the curtain, right? Rather than the I am Oz, right? So it's like God suddenly doesn't have to be the king anymore. He could be the dad, the Av, instead of the Melech. So that's the beauty of what King David obtained. So Judah also. Judah didn't live cruise control life. Judah lived hell. I mean, hell, everything, he took upon himself the guilt of thinking that he had killed Joseph, and then the whole thing that he had slept with a prostitute, not knowing that actually it was the woman that he was supposed to have married, but forgot to marry, and so on and so on and so on. Difficult life. But because of that, he went through transformation, which is interesting because in Hebrew, the word for child is the same root as the word for the baby. Meaning, just because you're physically born doesn't mean you're an adult. You have to go through a transition where the soul now can make you a mature person, overriding your, not you, God forbid, a person's basic anger or basic foul nature. They have a holier soul that's won the battle and now made you into a man, a human being, rather than just an animal with lots of skill sets. And so therefore that transformation is what Judah went through. He went through a kind of an arrogance, if you will, so to speak, and became a person who transformed. And that is what God wants from all of us. For us, there was a great rabbi, I think I shared this, Rabbi Soloveitchik, who once said in the Bible, in the earlier part, when it says, God says, let us make man, everyone asks the question, who is God talking to? Right? So one answer is the angels. But his answer was no. He was actually talking to man, to Adam. He said, listen, Adam, I'm going to give you everything you need. Respiratory, vascular, oxygen, water, whatever you need. I'm going to give you a planet packed with everything you'll ever need, even Netflix. I'll give you everything. But what? I need you to be my partner. Together we can create man. So therefore, I'm going to give you something called free will. And when you willingly choose to be good, then we're partners. And so that's the whole challenge, and that's the transformation. And therefore, that's why Judah is the leader, because he can go into the darkness and convert it into light. Now, the question is, what are the two facilitators that go with him? So those are the other two tribes in that first group are Zvulun and Issachar, right?
Okay. Let's talk about them next time.
Oh,
I should probably maybe wrap it up around here for video purposes. We can talk a little bit afterwards if you want, but just one last little concept. Well, kind of actually a bigger concept. When we read the story of the patriarchs of the tribes, the sons by which the tribes are known by their names, Levi, Judah, all this, a lot of them have kind of unflattering stories like what you just said about Judah. Is this mostly why do you think? Because it's kind of like it's like an example perhaps for like future generations. There's a lesson to be learned there. I read through this like apocryphal kind of text called the Patriarchs, and I don't know if it's real at all, but in that case, it kind of like goes through the sons of Jacob, and they kind of like reflect on their life, and then they realize what they did wrong, and they want their children to learn from it. So who knows if that's like a true text or not, but is that like kind of like the idea why? Because like you think, wow, they are the fathers of their tribe, and yet some of them did some pretty bad things, like Reuben and so on and so forth. So is that generally why with any given of the sons?
Oh, I think absolutely. I mean, don't forget, God made us as people, not angels.
Mhm.
Angels don't make mistakes. People make mistakes. Well, then why did God make us? Was that a mistake? No. The answer is that was the kavanah. That was the intent. God wanted a human being, like King Solomon says in two places. He said, the holy man falls 7 times and get up 8 times. And we call it the tzaddik, right? Well, what kind of holy man falls once, let alone 7 times? And then King Solomon elsewhere says the holy man, there's no holy man in the there's no holy man in the I'm trying to make the translation. There's no holy man in the world who hasn't sinned. Why didn't King Solomon say there's no man meaning of course human, male, female, but why didn't he say there's no man that hasn't sinned? You would think it's a contradiction to say a holy man who sinned. Well, then he's not holy. No, that's not at all correct. The concept of a holy man is that she is human, and as humans we will fail, but as humans with holy souls we will rise up and become better people, and then the failures will become our attributes, because it'll be the failures that become the bumpers or the stoppers from letting us go back again if we learn the lesson again, right? If we live in the world of cycles, we'll just fall into our addictions, we'll just repeat our mistakes. So, oh, how could I fall in love with that girl again? I just had a relationship with somebody exactly like that. Well, guess what? As your president, Harry S. Truman, once said, the only thing you don't know about the future is what you forgot to learn about from the past. But when you free yourself from those cycles, because you're a new person, you're not who you were yesterday. How boring to be the same person you were yesterday. You're a new person. One step, one step, one step. You're not running, but you're not stagnant. That's human. So you'll make a different mistake and you'll learn from that. And then you won't do that again. And now you're a better person. So yeah, that's why they were the role models, human role models. Because otherwise,
role models, they made mistakes, they acknowledged it, they gained that experience for themselves. Yeah, sorry, I'm just kind of like recapping it just in my mind. And because they determined to continue to do the best they could afterwards, in that way, they truly showed, they repented, they teshuva, they determined to do what they knew was right afterwards, and in that way it's like they demonstrate to God where their true loyalty lies, even though they messed up in the past.
exactly. Funny you use the word tshuva. I didn't know you knew that word. Because do you know what that word really means? The translation of that word?
I think I did at one time, but I think I forgot it.
Okay, no problem. It means to return.
Right.
So since we have in our essence the image of God, so therefore we can always go back to that.
Yep. That's a good note to end this on. So next time, you guys, we'll get more into all the different tribes. This was a good way to get into that topic, though. And I thank you, Rabbi Gurfein, for being willing to do this, to be on YouTube on my channel.
My pleasure.
The wisdom you share is truly invaluable, and a lot will benefit from it. And just as a warning to everybody, just like every time I have a guest, if any of you are disrespectful like you've done in the past, I don't put up with it. You're going to be blocked. I'm just giving you a forewarning, because every single time there's some knucklehead that always is just you've been warned. You've been warned. I know it's going to happen. You've been warned. It happens every time. But on that note,
I bless all of your viewers. A blessing from Jerusalem.
Perfect. I know that they appreciate that.
Yeah.
That's going to be it for this one. So if you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe, like this video if you liked it, leave your respectful thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. Also make sure to share this, and I'll talk to you guys later.